Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Gender and Development. And today's discussions is titled Gender Poverty and Poverty Reduction. This is the third lesson in Gender and Development for the Masters in Arts or Masters in Science program or as a master class. My name is Kwame Afaglu. All right, today we're going to be reviewing a bit to appreciate the difference between women in development and gender and development. It's based on the previous two discussions. Then in today's discussions, which is the main focus being gender poverty and poverty reduction, we'll be looking at what a certain explanation to what extreme poverty. Then we'll be looking at what is feminization of poverty. We'll be appreciating development as well as what the strategies to end poverty. When we talk of SDG 2030 and African Union Agenda 2063, and then we'll be looking at what structural adjustment program and national poverty reduction programs. All right, the differences between women in development and gender and development. Women in development we normally abbreviate as WID, and then gender and development we abbreviate as GAD. All right, so you could call it WID and then GAD. All right. Some of the clear-cut differences are that one, women in development is more short-termish or mid-termish, and then GAD, gender and development, is more long-termish in the sense that women in development focus more on practical gender needs, that is the daily needs of women and their children, whilst GAD emphasis or focuses more on what strategic gender needs, that is on the subordination of women in society. All right, that notwithstanding, there are other differences. Another difference is that women women in development is more focused towards women, whilst GAD, gender and development, is focused towards what equality of the gender, that's men and women in the social construct. All right, so then these differences become so clear. You look at what are some of the problems. Women in development think and acted that developmental plans and policies does not capture women enough or does not capture women at all. So they want it captured as a corrective measure. Then that of GAD, gender and development, are saying that no, it has got to do with more of a larger issue of equality between rich and poor, women and men, and then emphasis on women made to what empowered to catch up with that equality. So then you begin to ask yourself, so what is it? So then these are some of the differences. There are some few more, but let's make do with this for now. So let's look at what is the explanation of extreme poverty. Whilst looking at extreme poverty by United Nations is explained as what a certain condition that is characterized by severe deprivation of basic human needs. And the human needs include food, water, shelter, health, clothing, transport, education, and information. All right. So if that be the case, is that the only definition? Not necessarily, because you see, you could not look at these issues and think it is that simplistic. It's quite complex, and sometimes you cannot meander your way easily as it is, because World Bank also looks at its quantitative bit of what extreme poverty. World Bank is pegging it into monetary value, that is anyone who is earning less than $1.9 a day. Okay, if that be the case, they are being more quantitative or monetary, ignoring the qualitative bit, and then UN is also looking at the qualitative bit without necessarily putting quantities to it. So then you have to merge the two to understand. There is this issue when it comes to extreme poverty. You will find the statistics showing about near equality between men and women in the numbers of extreme poverty. About 383 million women are living in extreme poverty, as against 368 million men in same extreme poverty. and that is below $1.90 a day. It means that the world's growth pattern is what? Sort of shortened, because the mainstream, the fundamental issue here is the mainstream is male-centered. The mainstream is male-centered, meaning that per what that's women in development have said, we have neglected women. So then we are not in full developmental trajectory because we have eliminated or ignored women. Let's go for a commercial break and back. And welcome back to this section. We have tried to explain what extreme poverty is, and then we want to look at, we also said rather that mainstream is male-centered. So it means that if the mainstream is male-centered, it means the world is ignoring the women aspect. And so that itself is problematic, meaning that the world growth is not in full capacity. It is what? Half capacity. We are growing at half capacity, or the development of the world is in half capacity. If that is it, then we have to look at what development means and what deprivation and development means. One authority, CEN looks at it in terms of capacity approach. It says so the deprivation is about constraints on persons' opportunities and abilities to generate what? Valuable outcomes. And that to him is what? Deprivation, or that's extreme poverty. So it cuts across the two. It takes into consideration development and then extreme poverty, sort of. And so CEN's capacity approach is worth looking at. We have to understand what development also means. Development, before we come to feminism or feminization of poverty, it doesn't mean that when we talk of feminization of poverty, it doesn't mean that the men should be ignored, but the men are in the mainstream. Okay, so that's where gender and development, GAD, comes in with its equality concepts. All right, so development is just an increase in capacity of growth, especially when there are possibilities that you could take advantage of in various aspects. This is more of a qualitative explanation. Another bit is by this other one was by Maria de Laurels. All right. Then we have Mohammed Rabi. He also says that look, development is basically an economic concept that has positive connotations. That is what Mohammed Rabi also says. And so if you think of the two, you realize that it's a bit murky, but we just have to do with it and meander our way through nicely so that we achieve what we intend to achieve. If for now, in the world 2023, today being the 28th of October 2023, the other bit is got to do with what? Employment, access to resources or capabilities to resources. Fewer women have access to resources and capabilities than men do. Men have more access to capabilities, land in Africa and other things. Agricultural resources, besides agriculture, even employment, there are more men in employment than women, because we think that women must be sitting at home or domesticated and taking care of the children. So that's the construct, that's the societal purview of gender. But then we would have to think of how do we correct it. In our appreciation is the developmental concept. We have to look at what are the corrective measures. However, because we define it from the UN and World Bank in terms of extreme poverty and then development, it does not necessarily mean that UN and World Bank are those to implement poverty reduction. Because now we know there's extreme poverty, but how do we reduce it? Because if we don't reduce it, the world will be growing at half capacity. Growth will be at half capacity, and growth is at half capacity because about half the world population are women and the other half are men. So it's the men that we are experiencing the growth from, and what about the women? About. So then we have to correct it. But in correcting it, it's a national, it is not a supra body responsibility in terms of implementation, but it's more of a national. But the supra body being the UN and World Bank and IMF and co play a role in at the national level. So national poverty reduction strategies of various countries must be taken into consideration. Ghana has a national poverty reduction policy. Zimbabwe does have, Zambia does have, Cameroon does have. So let's look at that. And when it comes to Cameroon, there's enough report from GTZ, that's the German Technical Corporation. They came up sometime in 2010, 2012 with a report that says that in Cameroon, a lot of the cocoa farmers, the women have less access to land and less cocoa farms as compared to the men. So there must be a corrective measure. That is what affirmative action must be in the agricultural sector so that women have access to land and can farm. And then even when they are buying the produce, the amount they pay cocoa farmers, the women cocoa farmers, is less than the amount they pay for the same cocoa from their male counterparts of farmers. And that is not right. That needs to be corrected, Cameroon. So Cameroon has to correct that aspect, and they have taken the report and are working at it. Then let's look at Zambia. Zambia has come up with a report also by GTZ that there is no significant difference between men and women when it comes to what? Agriculture, which is also fine. That's another bit. Ghana hasn't got a clear-cut data on gender and issues when it comes to employment, access to employment. We have that for education. We do have for gender-based violence. What about unpaid work? I'm not too sure. With us, we do have a very clear employment data. So those are issues that, as participants or as viewers, you could explore into with respect to countries. So in this corrective measure, I said the national poverty reduction strategies must be taken into consideration. However, what I have observed is that most national poverty reduction strategies, or some national poverty reduction strategies, have not taken the quantitative bit into consideration. They are only looking at the qualitative bit, i.e. Ghana. And that itself can be problematic because whilst other countries are looking at affirmative actions from ensuring that the home, domestic, has got a minimum living standard with facilities as child benefit for women who are taking care of children in the house and co, and unpaid, they pay them for the utilities and all that. Ghana hasn't got that. So those are issues that you have to take quantitative monetary value of and then bridge the gap, move them out of extreme poverty by using these benefit systems that is tailored towards women and children. Then the vulnerable and the aged, that is another policy. That's a national policy. Then let's look at SDG 2030 is Sustainable Development Goal for the year 2030, where Goal 1 states, and I quote, end poverty in all forms, everywhere. Goal 5 also states, achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls, unquote. All right, so this idea is lofty. Its implementation is that SDG by UN is to ensure that they work in partnership with every national poverty reduction strategy team in every country, that they implement that, they put it in their policy and then draw it down in terms of policies and then planning. And that is important, very important. But more obvious and well stated is that of African Union Agenda 2063. And it says aspiration 1. Let me just read because it's quite voluminous. It says, a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development, where nations are determined to eradicate poverty in one generation and build shared prosperity through social and economic transformation of the continent. Lofty, nice rhetorics, but how to implement it becomes a problem because AU hasn't established its mechanism for that and how it works it out. Just like SDGs, we are committed to it, so we work towards it, and then there's measure, and when you meet it, there must be an award for it, or there must be a price tag to it. When it's tied to IMF loans and then World Bank loans facilities. All right. Aspiration 6 even goes on to say, an Africa where development is people driven, unleashing the potential of its women and youth, unquote. And that is where development means. That's where feminization of poverty can be reduced. Structural adjustment program that's passed also mentioned that we should have women, youth, or young women, children, aged, and vulnerable to be considered. And they all have it, but we still are losing the fact Africa is losing this feminization of poverty goals. We have to radically, or we have to quickly, not radically, we have to quickly acknowledge that and work towards it before 2030. Because as of today, 2023, a lot of the African countries are running short of this SDG Goal 1 and SDG Goal 5. The name is Kwame Afagro.